Where are you going to put the camera?
Hail, Herbert Hoover, son of toil, a gallant leader. Hail, pilot from the soil, you spring to be our chief. Hail, Herbert Hoover, blacksmith son, you strike for freedom. Hail, engineer, the world acclaims your favorite son.
My.
Hail, Herbert Hoover, son of toil, a gallant leader. Hail, pilot from the soil, you spring to be our chief. Hail, Herbert Hoover, blacksmith son, you strike for freedom. Hail, engineer, the world acclaims your favorite son. Hail, Herbert Hoover, son of toil, a gallant leader. Hail, pilot from the soil, you spring to be our chief. Hail, Herbert Hoover, blacksmith son, you strike for freedom. Hail, engineer, the world acclaims your favorite son. Hail, Herbert Hoover, son of toil, a gallant leader. Hail, pilot from the soil, you spring to be our chief. Hail, Herbert Hoover, blacksmith son, you strike for freedom. Hail, engineer, the world acclaims your favorite son. Hail, Herbert Hoover, son of toil, a gallant leader. Hail, pilot from the soil, you spring to be our chief. Hail, Herbert Hoover, blacksmith son, you strike for freedom. Hail, engineer, the world acclaims your favorite son. Hail, Herbert Hoover, son of toil, a gallant leader. Hail, pilot from the soil, you spring to be our chief. Hail, Herbert Hoover, blacksmith son, you strike for freedom. Hail, engineer, the world acclaims your favorite son. Hail, Herbert Hoover, son of toil, a gallant leader. Hail, pilot from the soil, you spring to be our chief. Hail, Herbert Hoover, blacksmith son, you strike for freedom. Hail, engineer, the world acclaims your favorite son. Hail, Herbert Hoover, son of toil, a gallant leader. Hail, pilot from the soil, you spring to be our chief. Hail, Herbert Hoover, blacksmith son, you strike for freedom. Hail, engineer, the world acclaims your favorite son.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Linda Rosenblum. I'm the moderator of this distance learning series. The Presidential Primary Source Project, National Park Service, Department of Interpretation, Education, and Volunteers out of the Washington, D.C. office. And today we're having a program presented by the Herbert Hoover National Historic and the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library. We're glad that you joined us today. You'll see on the slides that you're looking at now the Internet 2 National Park Service and the Presidential Libraries of the National Archives and Records Administration. At the bottom there, you'll see the Internet address where you can sign up and register for all the programs. We want to recognize our partners that you see, Internet 2, who's our membership, our host today. We have the National Park Service and the Presidential Libraries who present the content of these programs. Magpie, we want to thank for providing our live stream, and Blue Jeans Network, which is providing the bridges for us today. Thank you to our partners who have been making this program possible. I do want to ask that as the schools sign on, that they keep their microphones on mute. The way that this teleconference is set up, each screen is shown by what we call active speaker, which means that whoever is making the noise at the time will be the image that you see on the screen. So when the microphones are live, the the cameras will switch back and forth between whoever's speaking or whoever's making noise in the background. So we'll call on each school to participate individually, and then we'll ask someone to respond by getting up and turning their microphone on and answering the question or responding to each time that they're called out, and then we'll ask that you put your microphones back on mute. Now, the slide that you're looking at now is our disclaimer statement, where the schools are responsible to make sure that anyone participating in the program today is aware that the students will be on camera and or on microphone, and that any of this content may be recorded and posted on the internet or for use in an archive at a later time, and that it's the school's responsibility to make sure that they have the consent of the parents for the students to participate. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and call out each one of the schools, and we're going to ask the teachers at each one of the schools to select a spokesperson to come up and turn on the microphone and introduce your school. We want to know who your school is, what city and town or state you're from, and tell us what class that you're participating in and the name of your teacher. So we're going to start out with Walsh Middle School. Would someone from Walsh Middle School like to come up and introduce your class and greet the other participants?
Hello, we're at Walsh Middle School in Round Rock, Texas.
And what class are you in?
8th grade.
8th grade?
8th grade. U.S. history class.
U.S. history?
Yeah.
Walsh, we're having a little bit of difficulty with your audio. You might want to check your signal. We can hear you, but it's a little bit faint.
Okay,
Thank
as
you
I
for
said,
joining
we're
us.
kind of. Can you hear us okay? Because we're running off of
Yeah.
a webcam. Okay.
That's good. I think you just need to be closer to the microphone when you're talking. We can hear you good. Thank you for joining us, Walsh. The next, we're going to call Craig Public Library. Do we have any students at Craig Public Library that'd like to introduce themselves to the rest of the group?
Hello, my name is Colin Rice. That is Kelly Rice. We are homeschoolers. We live in Craig, Alaska.
Hi, and what grades are you in?
I am in 4th. Tully is in 2nd. No, yeah, 2nd.
Okay, thanks for joining us. Do we have anyone from Downtown High School in San Francisco with us today?
Hi, I'm the librarian at Downtown High School. We don't have students. They're all in testing.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. Will you be recording this or staying on the background with us?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Okay, Thanks. Okay, Colquitt County High School in Moultrie, Georgia. Do we have anyone online with Moultrie? From Moultrie? No one from Colquitt County? All right, we'll move on. Conrad Weiser High School in Pennsylvania. What's,
I'm Philip Weiser from Conrad Weiser in Robert City, Pennsylvania. We're 10th graders in U.S. Honors History too.
Thank you for joining us. Great to see you guys. Kenai Community Library in Alaska. Do we have any students that would like to introduce themselves? Do we have Kenai, Alaska Library? Kenai? I'm sorry, I said it wrong.
Linda, I saw they were connected. They may not have any homeschool students in the room quite yet.
All right. How about Hollis, Alaska? Hollis Public Library?
Yeah, we're here. I'm Calvin, and this is my sister Alice.
And you're from Hollis Public Library?
Yeah.
Hi, Colin. What grade are you and your sister Alice in?
I'm in 7th. I'm in 5th.
Okay. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch back up with you later during the program. All right. Our speakers today are Adam Prado and Matthew Schaefer. Adam is from the Herbert Hoover National Historic Site, a national park site, and Matthew is with the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library. And at this time, we're going to let them take over the program, and I'll catch up with you at the end of the presentation. Thank you. Adam, do you have your microphone on mute?
No, we don't. We're calling up the presentation now.
Sorry for the.
Okay, thanks for bearing with us. I'm Adam Prado. I'm a National Park Ranger at Herbert Hoover National Historic Site, and I'm with Matt Schaefer. He's an archivist at the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum. We work together. I'll start with where I work, and then we'll switch to Matt. So I'm a park ranger at a 200-acre national park in West Branch, Iowa, which is the birthplace, the gravesite, and home to the Presidential Library of President Hoover. The National Historic Site commemorates President Hoover's life with historic buildings and historic furnishings, museum exhibits, and landscape of the park itself. Also helps commemorate President Hoover's life. And these are the questions we're going to consider as we look at a park as a primary source. A little later, you're going to see some documents, and you'll probably learn a lot about using documents and artifacts as primary sources, but we're going to consider buildings, even a landscape, as being primary sources. So the questions we'll consider are: who restored and placed these buildings and other features in the historic site? Which things did those people choose to show us about Herbert Hoover's life? And which message were they trying to send about Herbert Hoover's life? So in the next couple of slides, I will answer those first two questions, and then perhaps Conrad Weiser High School can help me answer the third, and I'll let you know when you can unmute your mic. So Conrad Weiser, I want you to think a little bit about, after I show you which people started creating this historic site and what things they decided to include in it, I'd like you to think about which things were they trying to say about Herbert Hoover's life? What message were they trying to send? Herbert Hoover and his family, and that's President Hoover, his wife, Lou Hoover, and his sons, Alan and Herbert Jr., were the first people to start developing this park that memorializes the president. And they restored his birthplace, working alongside people in West Branch who admired the president, friends and allies of Herbert Hoover, who were interested in developing a park. They restored the birthplace of President Hoover in order to show the president's simple beginnings, and that's the house where he was born. I'll show you what it looks like today, while it was under renovation in the 1930s and 40s, and they restored it to make it look the way it did in the 1870s when Herbert Hoover was a small child. So if someone from Conrad Weiser would like to unmute and maybe tell me what you think they were trying to say about Herbert Hoover's life, and then we'll discuss that a little bit. What message were these people trying to send about Herbert Hoover?
We think it was trying to show how he came from very little into being a very influential man. Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you for answering. That is a great answer. Here's what Herbert Hoover said about his life in the birthplace, in the house he was born in. Herbert Hoover said when he was visiting West Branch as an old man, he said, "This cottage where I was born is physical proof of the unbounded opportunities of American life." And that's the birthplace as it appears today. It's a small 2-room cottage made out of wood. It's about a block or two from the main street of a very small town, West Branch, Iowa. President Hoover lived in this house with his older brother, his younger sister, and both his parents until he was about 3.5 years old. A very small house, simply furnished, with just enough space for everybody to have what they needed and nothing more. So you're exactly right. They were trying to show the people who designed this park and started restoring these buildings were trying to show with the birthplace the simple beginnings of President Hoover. There are some other historic buildings on the grounds that also tell that story. The blacksmith shop, the schoolhouse, and the Friends Meeting House. Across the street from the birthplace is the blacksmith shop, where a park ranger demonstrates the skills, creativity, and hard work that Herbert's father, Jesse, needed to be a successful businessman. And he owned a blacksmith shop and a wagon shop where he served people in the surrounding community. Next door to the blacksmith shop is the West Branch Schoolhouse. It's a 1-room schoolhouse, something that wasn't unusual in when Herbert Hoover was a kid. In small towns like West Branch, people in those towns thought that education was the key to creating good citizens and often supported sending their kids to school. Herbert Hoover attended school starting when he was 5 years old. The Friends Meeting House is where the Hoovers and other Quakers worshiped on Sundays and Wednesdays. The design of the meeting house is very plain. The meetings didn't emphasize preaching, but they emphasized more like inspiration. And so nobody spoke during these meetings. They were silent meetings. People did not speak unless somebody was inspired, somebody was moved to share an inspired message, a spiritual message. The men and women in the meeting were separated by the partition that divides the middle of the room, that allowed the women to sit separately and to participate equally away from the interference of the men. In addition to the historic buildings, there are some other features in the historic site that commemorate President Hoover's life in public service. The Presidential Library and Museum, which you'll hear about a little bit more in a few minutes, the statue of Isis, and the graves of President and Mrs. Hoover. The Presidential Library and Museum was opened in 1962. In fact, President Hoover was still alive. He was very old, about 87, when he attended the opening of his own presidential library. And that's the museum, Presidential Library and Museum, as it exists, as it looks today. That's where we're calling you from right now. Even the bizarre statue of Isis commemorates Herbert Hoover's public service career. The statue of Isis is a thank you gift from the people of Belgium. They gave it to President Hoover. They gave it to Hoover as a gift of gratitude for the humanitarian work, the food relief he helped provide in Belgium during the First World War, something you'll hear a little bit more about in a few minutes. President Hoover is agreed to be buried in West Branch, Iowa, and when he died in 1964, thousands of people lined the road and the route along to his final resting place. The president is buried next to his wife in a fairly simply designed but dignified gravesite in the historic site. So you can see there's a lot of different things in this little historic site, and they all connect values from President Hoover's small town upbringing to his later accomplishments in public service. The park's also a place where visitors can enjoy and experience these things as primary sources. As an example, the graves of President and Mrs. Hoover overlook the little house where Herbert Hoover was born. They're buried up on the hill where visitors can see both the beginnings and end of his life. And I'll turn it over to Matt Schaefer, archivist at the, maybe at the end. Turn over to Matt Schaefer, archivist at the Presidential Library and Museum, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the documents that the museum curates.
Hi, I'm Matt Schaefer. I work as Adam works with the primary sources of the physical environment. I work with the primary sources, papers, photographs, maps, the more traditional primary sources that you would see in a classroom context or in your local library. And I will be looking at Hoover as a master of emergencies in three contexts here. During World War I, when he and his wife assisted in the evacuation of American citizens from London. During World War I and immediately after, where he was instrumental in providing food relief to millions who needed food. And then in the Mississippi flood of 1927. And I'm going to put a question to you. I think I'll ask this question to Walsh Middle School for the first. If you're an American citizen in Europe in 1914 and war breaks out and you'd like to go home, how do you do that? What do you need to go home in the summer of 1942? Think on that for a minute. The second question I will put, I think I will put to the Conrad Weiser students. When war breaks out and you're one of 7 million Belgians in need of food, who do you turn to? And that's a question I'll put a little bit later. And then the third question, spring of 1927, water's rising along the Mississippi. What do you do as the water rises in this slow motion catastrophe? And I will throw that question open to whoever is ready to answer it. So war breaks out in 1914, and you're one of 120,000 American citizens trapped on the wrong side of the Atlantic. What do you need to get back to the U.S.? I'm going to put this to the students at Walsh.
Hello, I'm Emil Snakin, and I think that if you're trapped on another, country and war breaks out, you would have to have connections from the country like America and have president or help from by vehicles and by, other means of transportation and documents like this.
You're right. You would turn, since you can't reach the American president, you would turn to his agent in England, primarily. Usually, you would turn to the American ambassador, and many of the American citizens did, which basically overwhelmed the American ambassador. And he turned to Hoover and Mr. and Mrs. Hoover and other Americans in London to get them back, to help get them back Because on a logistical basis, one of the things you need to get back to the US is your passport. You'd also need a ship, money. And these are things that Mr. and Mrs. Hoover recognized immediately and did their best to organize the shipment of Americans back from London to the US. We're looking at an American bulletin produced by the American Relief Committee in London. It shows about 20 ships that are going to sail the last week of August 1914, showing you the port of departure, the ship line, and the number of passengers that can travel. What I like about this document is at the bottom, it explains you're going to need passports. And to get a passport, you're going to have someone testify for you, someone stand up for you. These are the little logistical niggling details that you don't really plan for if you're summering in England or summering in the continent in 1914. And these are the kinds of logistical details that the Hoovers were meticulous in attending to and careful to address. And in the course of the first 4 months of the war, they spent much of their time moving, working to get Americans back to the U.S. The next document, Adam is going to run the document slideshow for me because it's all I can do to hold my train of thought. We are now the Hoovers in doing this relief. Mrs. Hoover did a little 6-page report to her fellow citizens. Mr. Hoover, being an engineer, did a 21-page report to the U.S. ambassador, where he broke it down page by page, almost individual by individual. But this level of this attention to detail impressed the American ambassador so much so that when Belgians reported they were on the brink of starvation in October of 1914, the American ambassador turned to Hoover and said, "Can you help feed these people? How do you feed 7 million people? What do you have to have?" This is a question I'm going to put to Conrad Weiser High School.
Well, you're going to have food and organization so that you can actually get the food to them and have food to give to them.
Okay. How do you get the food?
Well, you can have people save food and get people to make more food. If you farm it, you can farm extra food, or you can try and eat less food.
Okay, conserve, produce more. We're talking about food that would already be flour, fats, dried milk. Because another thing you'd have to think about here is you're talking about shipping food from the non-war involved nations like America and Canada across the Atlantic to ports in Europe, Rotterdam primarily. So you have to get food that ships that will, that can bear being on a ship for 6 weeks. You have to get the ships lined up. You get it to Rotterdam, you're faced with another logistical question. Getting it from the ports, distributed, although Belgium's a small country, food does not distribute itself. You have to work with people within Belgium to distribute it to the literally thousands of soup kitchens and distribution centers in Belgium. And once again, Hoover's the guy to master these logistics. He is the one who raises the money to get the food, who works to get it shipped to Belgium. And works with people in America, for instance, William Edgar, who reports on stateside relief efforts done between the year of 1914 and 1915, where they raised money and moved literally hundreds of thousands of pounds of food across the Atlantic. Next. When war ends, and we've got this huge, we've got this huge apparatus, literally tens of thousands of volunteers raising $6 or $7 million a month to bring food from America to Europe, we're left with an apparatus with no clear function. The Commission for Relief of Belgium, which was the largest food relief effort in history, after the war ends, has resources and a question of what to do in terms of using them. And when war ends, Hoover uses the CRB fundraising apparatus and its distributional apparatus to bring food into Eastern Europe, which after the war was in a state of chaos. A lot of changes happened at the end of World War I, revolution in Russia, governments change in Germany and Austria, and Hoover basically reconstitutes the CRB to become the American Relief Administration to do food relief in Europe in 1918, 19, and 20. The CRB bulletin here recaps this with a little bio of Hoover and Mrs. Hoover. What I like about this is the biography of Herbert Hoover is brief. It's one of the largest bullets on the page here, but it talks only about his relief efforts, not about his day job. This is 1923. His day job in 1923 is he's working as Secretary of Commerce, but it really only goes into the detail about his relief efforts with the ARA, Commission for Relief, CRB Education Foundation. And also has a nice little bio of Mrs. Hoover, who's the president of the Girl Scouts at this point. Most of the other people on this page are names not known to history, who seem to take up a little more of our time and attention in this bulletin. While serving as Secretary of Commerce, the waters rise on the Mississippi. Now, I'm looking at, I must confess my geographic illiteracy. I don't know where Round Rock, Texas is, or the Robicenia, Pennsylvania. Are you guys on rivers?
Yes, actually, we have a river that goes right through town, and we have a history of having flooded out also.
Okay. What do you do if the water's rising in the town? How do you deal with the slow motion catastrophe that is a flood? And I'll let you think on that for a second and put it to your students perhaps. If a flood swamps your farm, just, rises up in your house so that your house is no longer livable, what problems do you have to solve with the flood?
First of all, you have to save people by, I guess, evacuating them. Second of all, saving all of your belongings, food inside the house, maybe even stores around, and saving all the property of the people.
Okay. All reasonable things. Problems that Hoover faced in the spring of 1927. If the flood is larger than your town, I mean, the flood of 1927 affected 7 states. In different parts of the Mississippi, it got 100 miles outside of its banks. So it's affecting 1,000 counties, so several hundred townships. How do you begin to solve a problem like that?
Well, I guess you would get transportation and organize all of the routes for people to get evacuated. That's number one. And I guess supplies as well to organize everything.
Yeah, you have to marshal transportation resources, food, medicine, housing, building camps to support the citizens. In doing this, Hoover tapped the best communications resources he had at the time. Here we have a telegram from a guy named George Morris, unknown to me, from Memphis, Tennessee, saying we have thousands marooned in villages and towns. They need succor. They need support. Turn to the, please use the radio to assure them that that help is coming. And Hoover listens to this plea and does his very first nationwide radio broadcast 2 days later, asking for American citizens to support the American Red Cross, to support the Army Corps of Engineers, and provide the hundreds of millions of dollars needed to basically build new towns, get food and medicine into the citizens where it's needed. Now, the original movie that we saw at the top of the hour here talked about 700,000 citizens displaced by the flood. That's a big number. And it's really hard to wrap your mind around that. Here at the Hoover Library, we have not 700,000 stories, but we have the stories of thousands of such citizens who wrote to Hoover asking for direct help. This is a letter from one of the sufferers from the flood who's written to the Red Cross. It's the end of May 1927. And he's saying, I've done all I can with the Red Cross. I've got a 12,000 acre farm. It's underwater. I need tools. I need seeds. I need help immediately, or else, my farm is going to go. I'm not going to be able to support myself or the hundreds of tenants who work on my farm. In 1927, we're talking about, it's post-Reconstruction America. Tenant farmers tended to be blacks. The landowners tended to be white. So we see this issue of race presenting itself in the flood. If we're talking about a segregated American society and you are trying to bring relief in to black and white citizens, do you anticipate any problems? If so, what kind of problems would you anticipate? And I'm going to put this question back to Conrad Weiser High School. So Walsh, you're off the hook.
Could you repeat that question again, please?
I'll put the question again. Okay, 1927. We're talking about a flood that has affected several southern states where Jim Crow is the law, basically the law of the land. A segregated society. How do you bring flood relief into a segregated society? What impact would Jim Crow have on the way you bring flood relief into Mississippi or Arkansas or Alabama?
Well, they would probably have helped the white people first and left the African Americans to fend for themselves until they had enough relief to help them too.
Fair enough. And Hoover did his best to battle that because that was the way the local governors, the local citizens committee wanted to see it unfold. Hoover tried to be more even-handed. So when he had the Red Cross set up relief camps, there was a relief camp for white farmers. He would ensure that there was also a relief camp for black tenant workers, black sharecroppers, which led to some blowback. Let's say on both sides. Black citizens saying you should do more. White citizens saying, why are you doing what you're doing for the black citizens? This led actually to a series of investigations. Hoover tapped the president of Tuskegee College, a guy named Robert Moton, to do a survey of flood relief efforts for African Americans. In June of 1927, Moton found within reasonable parameters that the flood relief was being handled in an even-handed way, at least in regards to race. Now, I've described the flood as a slow-motion catastrophe because it's slow in developing. It's also slow in abating. The flood of 27 made its impact felt through the fall. And in November of 27, a geologist in California at the Cal Berkeley School of Geology wrote to Hoover saying, the problem is now beginning to resolve. What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen in the future? And that's a profound question, and one that I'm not sure that anyone has actually really resolved, because the docks, the locks and dams, the levees have channeled the Mississippi but not necessarily tamed it. So when we talk about Hoover as the master of emergencies, we can say, yes, a short-term master of emergencies. He dealt with the problems facing him in 1927. There are emergencies that will present themselves in 1930 that he may not be able to master. We'll take questions.
All right, Matt, are you ready to open up questions to all the schools?
Yes, to all schools, to all.
All right, great. So we'll start. If you want to take your slides down, we can go back to the regular cameras, please.
Okay.
Thanks. Now we can see you. All right. We'll start with Hollis Public Library in Alaska. Would you like to ask any questions of the presenters?
When did the flood end?
I'll take that. The flood, the rains stopped pretty much the 1st of June. Waters rose until the beginning of July and began to recede, and the Mississippi was back within its banks by October. So the flood technically would have ended in the fall of 1927, but that meant that a whole growing season was lost to 600,000 farmers on the southern Mississippi.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Where is it that Hoover was buried again? Like where in the states or whatever? What state?
Which state was he buried in?
Yeah.
He's buried here in Iowa. That's where we're calling from. And so before he died, he agreed that he'd be buried in what is now the national park that commemorates his life. So in that last slide, when I showed a picture of the birthplace and the flag up on the hill with the 2 stones, he's buried close enough to his birthplace that visitors to his grave can see where he was born.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions. Thank you. Do we have anyone at the Kenai Community Library? No? All right. How about Craig Library? Do you have any questions for our presenters today?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay. Thank you, Craig Library. Do we have anyone on the line from Colquitt County High School yet? All right. We'll move on. We're going to go on to Conrad Weiser High School. Would you like to ask any questions? We're going to open it up for you guys to speak to the presenters directly.
How was the flood of the Mississippi River resolved?
It was, basically nature took its course. The floodwaters rolled out into the Gulf of Mexico. The water receded gradually over the course of months. In terms of meeting the short-term needs of the flood victims, the American Red Cross raised roughly $100 million to do flood relief, which was basically short-term housing, food, replacing lost clothing. It was in many ways a departure from previous efforts to do relief efforts, because it showed the limits of private philanthropy, and it showed the necessity for government intervention, because the Red Cross was great at meeting short-term needs, but they had no mechanism for rechanneling the river or building locks or dams. That had to be the Army Corps of Engineers. That meant there had to be a federal government intervention there to mitigate against future disasters.
Thank you.
Any other questions from Conrad Weiser?
Here we go.
I was wondering why Hoover deserved to be commemorated. Like, why did he deserve to be remembered?
I beg pardon, I didn't hear that.
Why was the question? Why does Herbert Hoover deserve to be remembered? I think
Yes.
that's a good. I think that's a great question. Do you have an opinion about that? Whether he deserves it or not?
I mean, I think that he did good things, but I don't know if he deserved to be remembered like so wholeheartedly. Like he has everything in Iowa.
Sure. Well, I think that's a really good question, and maybe you don't have to feel that he deserves it or not. He was the president of the United States, and by a lot of people's account, not a very good one. But he also did a lot of good things in his life. I think when they were developing the historic site that commemorates him, I think in particular he was really interested in showing people that he felt that if you grew up in a community that valued education, that valued hard work, that valued cooperation, that good things would happen to you. And so he, even though he was born in that little house, and even though when he was 9 years old, he was an orphan. Both his parents died when he was a young kid, and he had to go move out of his house and move and live with other relatives and live with an aunt and uncle he didn't know very well. And I think that he felt all those things that that he learned when he was little helped him overcome things like his parents dying, overcome not having a lot when he was born, taught him to rely on himself, to work hard, to study, to go to college, to get a good job, to impress people with it. I think he felt, to Herbert Hoover, that was the American dream. That was what his birthplace represented to him, was that he had all the opportunities he needed. It didn't matter how he was born, but that in this country, he felt everybody had a chance to succeed. And because it worked for him, he wanted to share that with people.
Now, you guys, you're in the AP 10th grade class?
Yes.
Okay. So have you got to Hoover yet? Have you got to the Hoover presidency in your studies?
Yes.
And would you was that chapter titled Master of Emergencies?
No.
I don't think so. Because his presidency showed him anything but a master. I think that's fair to say. I think, historians can take a lot of different interpretations, but I can't imagine historians defending Hoover's presidency as mastery. How did your text or your readings handle it?
How did your text handle it?
How did your textbook describe Hoover's presidency?
It showed him in a very negative way because it was talking about how he didn't do much during his presidency and stuff like that.
It talks about how he handled the Great Depression.
It was more about how he didn't do much with the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very typical. I mean, that's a typical textbook. Compared to who came after, Hoover didn't push the right buttons. Wasn't exactly the master of the American political or American economic system.
Another question.
You said that most textbooks portray Hoover to be as a not effective president during the Great Depression, just like our textbook did. Why do you think many sources like that don't show the good things that he did like you guys did here today? Thank you.
Short answer is history is vast. I studied history, from high school through college, graduate school. And, when we did World War I, Herbert Hoover was invisible. When we did the 1920s, Herbert Hoover was invisible. He's, it's only in West Branch, only at the Hoover Library, I think, that his efforts in both of those, in both of those situations is front and center, is a focal point. If you're talking about World War I, when America comes into focus, it's Woodrow Wilson and in American entry into war. At least it was 100 years ago when I did American history. I imagine it's much the same today. When you talk about the 1920s, you're talking, when I took classes, we talked primarily about The boom of the American economy, prohibition, agricultural difficulties, the rise of modern America. I don't know if that's still the way they teach history, but in either of those cases, Herbert Hoover is not even a footnote. I turn to Adam.
I'm not sure I can answer the question why people don't include him. I guess his activities as a president would be some of the most, I guess, what he did as president would be how the textbook treats his presidency. I guess I would say that he doesn't, it's okay that he wasn't a good president. We still need to learn about him. And, places like the historic site and the Presidential Library and Museum, I think they give us a sense of if he didn't make the right decisions, or if you feel he didn't make the right decisions, we'll say, why did he make the decisions he did? And I think if you look at his upbringing, the idea that he was self-reliant and that worked for him may have colored the way he approached his political decisions as president. And that's why these places are really important. It's a place where you can come and learn about Herbert Hoover, whether you like him or not. You can look and see where he came from. You can look at the documents he produced, the letters he wrote, things that belong to him, and you can kind of figure out for yourself why did Herbert Hoover do the things he did, and do I like him or not? So I think those are some really great questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we're going to move on to Walsh Middle School. Do you have any final questions for our presenters today? That was great discussion, Conrad Weiser High School. Thank you.
Yes, actually, our students have several questions. I'm going to have each one ask them real quick.
Hello, Emil.
Sure.
Walsh Middle School. What was the overall cost of the flood of the Mississippi River? Or repair of it, whatever?
Oh boy, that's a very good question because the numbers I've seen range from 400 million to just over $1 billion. But it depends on your timeline, how they answer that question. The cost immediately in 1927, as opposed to the long-term cost of sort of rebuilding agricultural infrastructure. So it's a range.
Okay, we have another one.
I'm Sarah from Walsh Middle School, and I was wondering, how did the efforts that we talked about in this conference contribute to Herbert Hoover's?
How did they contribute to what?
She was wondering how the efforts contributed to his presidency.
The short answer is he campaigned as master of emergencies. That film you watched at the top of the hour, that was an excerpt from a campaign film run in 1928. And when he ran in 28, he was able to campaign that, he was a self-made millionaire. He fed Europe in World War I. He was the best Secretary of Commerce ever. He did flood relief in 1927. Everything he touched turned to gold. That sheen, that bulletproof patina wore off pretty quickly in the presidency.
Okay, we have one more student.
Hi, I'm David from Walsh Middle School, and I was just wondering, how did Herbert Hoover die?
How did Herbert Hoover die? Was that the question?
Yes, that's correct. He was wondering how he passed
away. Short answer, old age. He was 90. He had, in the last couple of years, a series of stomach ailments, but by and large, systems just shut down. When a 90-year-old man dies, you don't do an autopsy. You just put him in a box and bury him.
Okay, I think our last one.
What precautions were made to stop the Mississippi River from flooding again?
After the flood, the Army Corps of Engineers basically re-examined their levees and dikes and dams on the lower half of the Mississippi, rerouted the river in some places, did a series of locks to control the inflow. It remains to be seen because we've never seen that much rain in the lower Mississippi Valley since 1927. It remains to be seen whether the Army Corps' answers are sufficient, to a 15-inch rain in the space of 6 weeks.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Welsh Middle School. This is going to end our presentation today. We want to thank our presenters, Adam Prado and Matthew Schaefer. I think they did a great job, and we want to thank each one of the schools for participating today. I think you guys all had some really great questions and some really great responses to the questions that the presenters gave you. Our next program in this series is going to be at the Eisenhower National Historic Site in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And we'd like to invite you all back for that. The Eisenhower program is going to be on Wednesday, April the 30th. So you can register for the event at the Internet 2K20 email address that you saw at the beginning of this program. And we'd like to thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you back at our next program. And we'd also like to thank each one of our partners in this program: Internet 2, the National Park Service, the National Archives Presidential Libraries, Magpie, and Blue Jeans Network for hosting this bridge for us today. Thank you.
Thank you.